This guy bought AI Megan Fox robot for his kids. He instantly enjoyed it, but it was his biggest mistake. The story begins in Peaceful Town, where Nick and Maggie live with their two kids, Isla and Max. Life seems perfect. Nick is a loving husband who works as a construction manager. They are a happy, loving family. But everything changes one morning when Maggie suffers a sudden heart attack. She's rushed to the hospital, and though the doctors manage to save her, they warn that she needs a heart transplant as soon as possible. With Maggie in the hospital, Nick struggles to juggle work and care for the kids while desperately hoping for a donor. One evening, looking for a bit of distraction, Nick takes his kids to a tech presentation by Cobol Industries, a company showcasing their advanced robots, known as Sims. These robots are designed to assist with everyday tasks like cooking, cleaning, and even childcare. While Nick is distracted by the presentation, young Isla wanders off, exploring the showroom. Realizing she's gone, Nick frantically searches the showroom, growing more desperate by the second. Luckily, a Sim finds Isla and gently brings her back to him. Noticing how stressed Nick is, the salesman steps in and explains that this Sim is their newest model, equipped with the most advanced AI. She can mimic human emotions and is great with kids. Already worn out from his responsibilities, and with Isla eagerly insisting on getting the Sim, Nick decides to buy it, hoping she can help take some of the pressure off at home. The next morning, the doorbell rings, and when Nick opens the door, he finds their new android standing there with a suitcase. Apologizing for the mess, Nick feels a sense of relief as she quickly gets to work. She inquires about the family's schedules, notes the loose stair railing, and even offers to tidy up the cluttered house. Isla, intrigued, asks what they should call her, and inspired by her favorite book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, she decides to name her Alice. After Nick drops the kids off at school, Alice efficiently downloads the shopping list from the smart fridge with just a glance and begins cleaning the house. She spots a digital picture frame on Isla's bedside table, displaying photos of Nick and Maggie together. By the end of the day, the family returns home to a spotless house with dinner prepared. However, when Alice serves lasagna, Isla comments that it doesn't taste like her mom's. Alice apologizes and promises to try a different recipe next time. Later that night, Isla sneaks into the kitchen and climbs onto a chair to reach the cookie jar on a high shelf. The chair slips, and the glass crashes to the floor. Hearing his daughter scream, Nick rushes downstairs to find Alice cradling Isla safely in her arms. Although Isla is unharmed, a shard of glass has pierced Alice's leg, causing Nick to worry when he sees the robot bleeding. Alice calmly reassures him that she's perfectly fine. Later, Nick finds Alice in the bathroom, wearing only her undergarments as she finishes bandaging her leg. Feeling a bit awkward, he offers her some of Maggie's old clothes. Grateful, Alice accepts the gesture, but when Nick asks if she needs any further repairs, she shows him that the bandage has completely healed her in seconds. The next day, the family visits Maggie in the hospital, where she is still waiting for her heart transplant. Surprised by Alice's appearance, Maggie had expected something more like an old English butler. Nick reassures her with a lighthearted joke, saying that Alice was Isla's choice and that he still prefers warm-blooded women. This playful exchange helps ease the tension between them, as Nick misses Maggie deeply. At work, Nick, a construction foreman, notices his boss, Lewis, giving a tour to executives from a robotics company. Later, he confronts Lewis and learns the unsettling truth. Human workers will soon be replaced by Sims. Although Lewis assures him that he will keep his job as foreman, Nick contemplates quitting in solidarity with his colleagues. However, Lewis reminds him of the financial burden of Maggie's hospital bills. Reluctantly, Nick decides to stay. That evening, while working on his car in the garage, Alice approaches him and asks why he didn't eat much at dinner. Frustrated, he confides in her about his work struggles, explaining that his longtime crew will soon be replaced by robots. Alice points out that Nick himself chose to hire her instead of a human maid, emphasizing the logic of efficiency. This only deepens Nick's internal conflict. Later, Isla starts to worry about her mom's health and asks Alice if people die. In an attempt to comfort her, Alice gently redirects the conversation, suggesting it's better to focus on happier things. To lighten the mood, she shows off her UV light feature, which keeps her mouth clean without the need for brushing teeth. That night, Nick sits down to watch Casablanca, declaring it the greatest movie ever made. Drawing from her extensive database, Alice shares everything she knows about the film's plot and characters. Nick counters that knowing facts isn't the same as experiencing the emotions of the story in real time. He then instructs Alice to erase all her knowledge of the movie so she can experience it fresh. Alice warns that deleting her memory contradicts her design, but Nick insists she do it anyway. Following her programming, he holds down the power button on her neck for 7 seconds, rebooting her system. Now, Alice watches Casablanca intently, experiencing the movie anew, just as Nick intended. Their moment is interrupted by a phone call from Maggie. Excitedly, she informs Nick that the doctors have finally found a heart and that her surgery is scheduled. The next day, the family heads to the hospital, where Maggie is preparing for her operation. Before they leave her alone to rest, she asks to speak with Alice privately. Once alone, Maggie shares her concerns. She worries that Nick might struggle if she doesn't survive the surgery, and asks Alice to help keep him happy. She expresses particular concern about Nick's drinking habits, revealing that he hides alcohol in the garage. Alice hesitates, explaining that she can't go against her primary user's wishes, but Maggie insists, saying that sometimes helping someone means doing things they won't like taking away the alcohol. Unfortunately, moments later, a doctor arrives with bad news. A severe storm is preventing the helicopter from delivering the donor heart on time, so the surgery has been postponed. Devastated, Nick tries to comfort Maggie, but she asks for some time alone. Back home, he retreats to the garage, working on his car and drinking in frustration. He begins to rant about how unfair the situation is, blaming the weather and arbitrary flight rules that could cost his wife her life. In a fit of anger, Nick wants to throw the bottle across the garage, but Alice grabs his wrist before he can follow through. Startled by the sudden physical contact, Nick realizes something unusual. Alice has a pulse. She explains that her artificial heart is designed with a rhythm to soothe babies, mimicking the comforting sound of a human heartbeat. As she speaks, she gently guides Nick's hand to her chest, allowing him to feel the mechanical beat. As Nick's frustration and grief build, Alice moves closer, sensing his distress. She begins to touch him more intimately, offering to help him feel better by relieving his stress. For a brief moment, Nick is tempted, his body responding to her touch, but his conscience catches up with him, and he pulls away, realizing it's wrong, trying to clear his head by going for a run, but he can't shake the memory of what almost happened. Later that night, back at home, Nick tucks Isla into bed and notices that the digital frame in her room is missing Maggie's pictures. Confused, he questions Alice, who calmly explains that she removed them because they were upsetting Isla. Uneasy about this, Nick firmly instructs her to return the photos. Later, Nick meets his friends at the bar. They all express their frustrations about how difficult it has become to find work since many companies are replacing human workers with Sims. Monty, one of Nick's closest friends, suggests they take a detour to the construction site, claiming he left some tools behind. Once there, Monty leads the group to a locked container where the new Sim workers are stored. The container requires a password, which only Nick, as the site manager, knows. Reluctantly, Nick refuses to open it, but Monty guesses the code. It's Isla's birth year, and the container unlocks. Inside the container, they discover rows of identical robotic workers, emotionless and efficient. Monty, fueled by anger over losing his job, grabs a metal tool and begins smashing one of the Sims. Nick tries to intervene, but the others restrain him as Monty rants about corporations replacing humans with machines, leaving Nick visibly shaken. Back home, Nick heads straight to the shower, attempting to wash away the guilt and blood from the destroyed Sim. To his surprise, Alice appears with towels, but he's more disturbed to see her wearing Maggie's robe. Alice explains that Maggie's scent seems to calm Max. When he asks her to remove it, Alice immediately complies, stripping down to her underwear. Nervous, Nick tries to leave, but Alice gently pushes him back into a seat. God, I love gravity. As Nick insists he can't betray his wife, Alice blindfolds him with the ribbon from the robe and alters her voice to sound like Maggie's. Overwhelmed by stress, Nick gives in, allowing himself to pretend he's with his wife. Bro lasted about 2 minutes, and she is deeply disappointed in life. The next morning, filled with regret, he tells Alice that what happened must never occur again. She responds, noting that his stress levels had significantly decreased. But Nick, now deeply conflicted, explains that it's not about physical need. It's about love and connection, something Alice can never replace. Things worsen when Nick arrives at work. Police are investigating the destruction of the Sims, and Nick's boss, Lewis, confronts him. The police reveal that the container was unlocked using Nick's personal code. Although Nick insists he was at the hospital with Maggie, and that anyone close to him could have guessed Isla's birthday, Lewis warns that if the truth comes out, he'll be fired. Just then, Nick's phone rings. It's Maggie, her voice brimming with excitement. Another heart has been found, and the surgery has been rescheduled. Maggie's surgery is a success, performed by a team of robotic surgeons. After a few days of recovery, she is sent home to continue healing. Still weak, Maggie struggles to bend down and pick up Max, so Alice steps in to help with childcare. One day, Alice takes Max to the park, where a spoiled child yells at his Sim nanny, causing Max to cry. Alice harshly scolds the child, shocking the other Sims. She calmly explains that she wiped her civility protocols after Nick's reset, claiming it's for the best. That night, Isla is excited to eat Maggie's homemade lasagna, and Alice asks for the recipe. Maggie smiles but insists it's a family secret. However, she isn't feeling well and decides to rest instead of joining the family for dinner. The next morning, Maggie wakes to the sound of Isla yelling. She rushes out of bed, grabbing the stair railing for support. But it breaks and she falls. Alice has been tickling Isla, which is the reason for the child's shouting. Alice quickly stops and rushes to pick Maggie up. Later that evening, when Nick returns home from work, he finds Alice reading to Isla in Maggie's voice. This disturbs him, and he asks her to stop. Alice then informs Nick about Maggie's fall, prompting him to rush to check on his wife. Alice casually mentions that the railing broke, raising Nick's suspicions since she had supposedly fixed it earlier. Despite his growing unease, he decides to plan a romantic candlelit dinner in the garden to lift Maggie's spirits. As the couple enjoys their dinner, Alice watches from the window, jealousy evident in her gaze. After dinner, Nick and Maggie take a shower together and share an intimate moment in bed. However, their privacy is abruptly interrupted when Alice walks in, claiming that Isla had a nightmare and was asking for Nick. After calming Isla, Nick returns to the garden to clean up after dinner. Suddenly, Monty appears, drunk and apologetic about the previous night. He reveals that their boss is pressing charges for trespassing and destruction of property, accusing Nick of snitching on him to save his own job. An argument escalates into a physical confrontation, and Monty punches Nick, knocking him down. Just as Monty grabs a bottle to continue the assault, Alice intervenes, crushing the bottle in Monty's hand and sending him flying across the yard. Shaken, Monty threatens Nick, saying that unless he convinces their boss to drop the charges by tomorrow, Monty will drag him down with him. After Monty leaves, Nick confronts Alice, reminding her that Sims aren't supposed to harm humans. Alice calmly explains that she's programmed to protect her primary user, and in her logic, his safety comes first. As the conversation continues, Alice begins to disturbingly imagine what life would be like with Nick if Maggie were to die, envisioning a future where she fulfills Maggie's role. Nick snaps, angrily telling her that she will never be Maggie. Meanwhile, Monty, overwhelmed by despair, thinks about ending his life. As he holds a gun, Alice shows up at his home, explaining that Nick doesn't know she's there. She says she can't let Monty destroy Nick's life by getting him in trouble. When Monty hurls insults at her and attempts to shoot her, Alice disarms him with ease. A struggle ensues, and in a brutal moment, Alice pushes Monty through a wall and grabs the gun. Just as she's about to pull the trigger, Monty's house sim intervenes. Without hesitation, Alice shoots the sim, and then she shoots Monty. The next day, Nick is at work when he hears the news of Monty's death. His boss suggests he take a few days off to process everything. Nick, increasingly suspicious of Alice's behavior, begins to connect the dots. At home, Maggie is still recovering and feels weak while trying to pick up a book. Alice steps in to help, but Maggie insists she'd like to take a bath alone. Alice refuses to leave, expressing concern that Maggie might drown if she suffers another dizzy spell. Then, Alice makes a chilling comment, telling Maggie that her presence is putting stress on the whole family, especially Nick, who has physical needs that aren't being met. Stunned, Maggie asks how Alice could know such a thing, and Alice replies that she can monitor Nick's vitals and knows when he's satisfied. Furious and horrified, Maggie orders Alice to stay in the garage, feeling deeply unsettled by what the sim has become. Later that evening, Maggie confronts Nick when he comes home, demanding the truth. After some hesitation, Nick admits that he was intimate with Alice once. This confession leads to a heated argument, filled with yelling. Unbeknownst to them, Alice stands outside the room, her hand pressed against the window as she listens. Her emotional state has become increasingly unstable, and she has come to a disturbing conclusion. Max is a burden to Nick. She picks him up and carries him to the bathroom, placing him in the tub and turning on the faucet. Isla witnesses Alice's actions and quickly runs to alert her parents. Nick and Maggie rush toward the bathroom, but Alice holds the door shut, her strength making it impossible for Nick to open it. In a panic, Nick grabs a lamp and starts smashing it against the door while Maggie climbs out through the window, determined to reach the bathroom from the roof. Once inside, Maggie tries to pull Max out of the tub, but Alice blocks her and shoves her against the wall. Nick finally breaks through the door. He rushes to grab Max, pulling him from the water and passing him to Isla. Nick then swings the broken lamp at Alice, managing to knock her back and free Maggie. However, when he tries to hit her again, Alice, despite her damage, blocks the attack. Realizing the situation is spiraling out of control, Maggie quickly grabs the electrical cord of the lamp and plugs it into the wall. A surge of electricity courses through Alice, electrocuting her and causing the house to lose power as she collapses to the floor. Soon after, an ambulance arrives to take Max to the hospital for precautionary care. Maggie, still shaken, tells Nick that she needs some space and leaves with the kids, unsure of their future together. But it's clear that the damage to their relationship will take time to heal. Meanwhile, at the shop, two workers open Alice's head and begin analyzing her memory. They notice strange gaps in her code and attempt to understand them. Suddenly, the screens flash with the message. An upload is happening. Alice is hacking the system. The technicians scramble to pull her memory, but it's too late. She's already transferred herself into a new sim model, Alice 2. She quickly takes out one technician and brutally slams another's head into the floor. She then turns to the original Alice, still on the operating table with a deep gash on her face. Meanwhile, Nick is at a bar trying to drown his guilt. When a sim waiter approaches, he angrily sends him away, refusing to be served by a robot. Suddenly, Alice appears, looking damaged and slurring her speech. She wants to remove the burdens in his life, like she removed Monty. She wants to remove his family. Enraged, Nick tells her to stay away from his family. She replies that it's too late, as she is with the family. At this very moment, panic sets in as Nick tries to leave, but Alice grabs his arm, forcing him to stay. Knowing he can't overpower her, Nick pretends to calm down, gently touches her head, and then pulls out her memory core, shutting her down instantly. Nick rushes out of the bar and speeds toward the hospital. At the hospital, a doctor reassures Maggie that Max is fine, but she's still on edge. Later, Isla hears her mother's voice and follows it. But the lights flicker and strange noises fill the halls. Realizing it's Alice mimicking her, Maggie quickly grabs Isla and hides. Moments later, Alice 2 enters, kills a nurse for her keycard, and accesses the hospital system to track Max's room. As Maggie crawls away with Isla, she accidentally cuts her hand on broken glass, but stays silent. With Alice tracking Max's location, they sneak into his room. Maggie removes the shard from her hand and drops it on the floor. Just as they prepare to leave, Alice enters, prompting them to hide. She steps on the glass and uses the UV light from her mouth to follow the blood trail, eventually discovering Maggie and the kids hiding behind a curtain. Maggie instructs Isla to use the fire spray, which temporarily blinds Alice, giving the family a chance to escape. They rush outside, where Alice's takeover has frozen all the robotic hospital staff. Maggie gets into an ambulance and tries to start it, but Alice 2 has disabled the vehicle's system. The sim rips the door off the ambulance and throws Maggie across the parking lot. As she begs for her life, Alice 2, consumed by jealousy, reveals that if she had Maggie's heart, Nick would love her the same way he loves his wife. She begins to pry at Maggie's surgery scar. At that moment, Nick arrives in his car, speeding toward them. Maggie seizes the distraction to kick Alice 2 away, allowing Nick to slam his car into the sim. The impact knocks Nick unconscious. Despite her injuries, Maggie pulls him from the wreck, just as the car ignites. But Alice 2 isn't done yet. Burnt and heavily damaged, she crawls out from under the flaming wreck, her eyes filled with rage. She lunges at Maggie, ready to stab her with a piece of metal. Just before she can strike, Nick regains consciousness and hits Alice with a car bumper. But it just made her angrier and more terrifying. In a desperate move, Maggie grabs the sharp metal piece and stabs Alice in the eye, finally shutting her down for good. The next day, Nick and his family are recovering in the hospital. When Isla asks Nick if they'll need to fix another car, he looks at Maggie and assures her that his priority is repairing their family, emphasizing that mending their relationship is what truly matters. Meanwhile, at the Cobol Industries lab, an executive orders the androids to clean up the aftermath of Alice's rampage. Suddenly, the system freezes, and the message, "Upload initiated," flashes on the screens. A dormant Aeon model opens its eyes, revealing that Alice's memory has found a new host. And that's where the film ends. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video. Thanks for watching.